Hi, friends! Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Diane, and today we're going to be learning about the anatomy of light and shadow as it falls on a three-dimensional object in oil pastel. We're going to be creating this approximate drawing together. A red sphere on a blue surface. I'm just going to walk you through step by step the whole thing, and as we go, we're going to be talking about the different types of light and shadow, what they're called, and how to realistically replicate them in a dry color medium. So thank you for joining me, and let's get to it. So in order to do our drawing, our study of the anatomy of light and shadow in oil pastel, I'm going to just walk you through the materials we need, which are very few. You need something round. I just have a roll of tape here that will create a circle on your paper, as big as you want it to be, but you don't want it tiny because it's hard to render, and you don't want it so big that it takes up most of the paper. So something like this is fine. A mug from the kitchen, whatever, just a flower pot, something that's got a perfectly round base or top. You'll need a pencil to draw with, piece of paper, set of oil pastels. I have a set of Pentel oil pastels. Any brand is fine. These are a great just sort of student or beginner set. You can get it at any art store and some drugstores. Actually, I've seen these in like the stationery aisle. And you can have a towel on hand if you want to wipe some extra oil pastel off your fingers, but that usually isn't necessary with oil pastel because it's a pretty neat, tidy medium. Anyway, grab your round object and your pencil and draw a circle. I'm choosing to do the inside circle because I want to do a slightly smaller circle, just because it goes a little bit faster for the sake of your time and this video. I put it a little bit off center on the paper so that I can have space here for a shadow that's going off to the side. That shadow is cast by our imaginary light source coming from the right, and therefore it's called a cast shadow. We'll talk about that when we get there. And I'm also going to just label all the shadow and highlight types as we go. So we're going to be drawing a red sphere on a blue surface. And I chose those two colors because they're kind of bluish green, I guess. They're similar, they're opposite each other on the color wheel. Red and green are opposites. And I threw a little blue in there just to be fancy and make it more interesting than just direct opposites. So we'll start off with some light blue, and you can see I've used these pastels before, so they are dirty. So you can have a piece of scratch paper handy also for cleaning your oil pastels, and just rub it on your scratch paper before you put it onto your nice paper to get all the extra color off. And if you happen to get a little hint of pink or something, don't worry about it. It'll probably just add character. I'm not going to color the entire background. I'm just going to kind of pick a section, mainly to save time. Not that we're in a huge hurry, but you don't need to sit here and watch me color an 8x10 sheet of paper. So I'm starting by just kind of coloring around the bottom edge of the apple to try to keep the integrity of that circle. And then when I'm done with that, I'm just going to color off to the side. And I'm coloring pretty lightly. I'm going to color lightly for my first layer no matter what, because it's sort of non-committal that way, and you can just build upon it and add to it. The color I'm laying on a little bit thicker as I get closer to the apple, and as I get away from it, just a little more wispy, sort of creating the effect that it's disappearing. And I'll just go a little higher. It doesn't really matter where you stop because this is just a sketch anyway. And the whole point is to understand how light and shadow behave on an object in color. So that's just the base for our background. And then I'm going to use the lighter red as what's called the local color. That is just a term for the main color of an object. So my object is red. I'm picking this red for my main color. And the first thing I'm going to do so that I don't color where the brightest highlight is just very lightly draw a big circle, bigger than I want my highlight to be, because I want the highlight to fit in there and be able to blend out. So I drew that, and then I'm just going to color very lightly around it. And I'm coloring in the direction of the sphere, sort of around and around rather than side to side or diagonal, because it will lend itself to the spherical feeling of the object. The more you can sort of discipline yourself to color in the direction your object naturally flows, like I did the background side to side, because tables or flat surfaces usually appear that way to the eye. And now I'm doing the sphere in round strokes because it's round. Anyway, the more you can do that, the more you're laying the groundwork for layering as you go, and the more spherical or flat or whatever your object will be. It's just sort of an organic way of building up the color as you go. So I'm being very careful around the edges, trying to find a point on the pastel so that I don't go outside the object if possible. And I'm getting a little bit darker as I get away from the highlight, just because, again, I'm sort of laying the roadmap for what's going to come. So there's our local color, first layer. And now I'm going to put in our core shadow. The core shadow is opposite the highlight. It's the darkest part on an object. And actually, I'm going to use this darker red both for the first layer of core shadow as well as the very outside edge, which is going to be a little bit lighter than the core shadow. That's going to be called the reflected light, because the light is coming from the right, bouncing off the mat and reflecting onto the edge of your object, which makes it appear a little bit lighter on the very edge than it does close to the edge. So I'm going to start by cleaning this red because it's dirty, just rubbing it on my scratch paper. And then I'm going to color a half moon, not a quarter moon shape, starting kind of at the top left, because the moon is going to, the crescent is going to go like this. It's going to sort of hug the sphere, but it disappears over the top and over the bottom, sort of opposite each other. And the crescent is about as far away from the highlight as it can get without going off the back edge. So this will be the left side of the crescent, and it'll disappear about right here on the edge of the apple. And then I'm going to just sort of outline a crescent shape. Looks weird right now, right? But don't worry, we will get there. So I'm going to color pretty solid. Now I'm pressing harder, and as you can see, pressing harder in oil pastel means getting rid of all the white showing through. And I'm pressing hard because this is the darkest part of the object. And this isn't even the darkest color we're putting on this piece. This is just the first layer. So I've got that on there, and now I'm going to color lightly out to the edge with the same color to just do a second layer of core shadow color, but on the reflected light. Again, just sort of laying the groundwork for the ultimate reflected light at some point. But also the reflected light should be a little bit darker than the local color because it is in shadow. And then I'm going to use the core shadow color, the darker red, and color very lightly little circles along this edge because I want it to blend. We do not want a hard edge there. We want it to go seamlessly from dark to lighter red to highlight. So just very light circles, kind of layering over and over again until I've obscured that sharp edge. One thing about oil pastel is it does develop these little crumbs, so you can just kind of wipe them off or even blow them off if they're loose, if they're not stuck to the paper. And I'm going to continue, now that I've got the main crescent in there, I'm going to continue the ends of the crescent up the side of the sphere so that they sort of naturally disappear over the edge. Whoops, I went a little outside the sphere there. Not the end of the world. It is just practice, but you know, I make mistakes. So I'm making this very thin on the outside because that it creates the illusion that it's round there and the dark sort of disappears over the edge, but we want it far away from the highlight. And now just looking at the shape, it looks like I could bring the darker red up a little bit here just to make it really, really round. It was more of an oval shape before. There we go. Okay, so now I'm done with the reds for now, and or excuse me, the dark red. I'm going to go back with the light red and do another coat over the local color, not pressing super, super hard, but definitely harder than I was before to kind of build up the color there. And blend it further into the darker red. And then I'm going to use this color. It's like a light peach. Incidentally, if you are using a different set of oil pastels, just use whatever you have that's closest. It will be totally fine. And now I'm pressing harder with the light peach. These lighter colors are great blenders, but I also want this area to appear lighter because it's leading into the highlight. So I'm kind of doing like a wreath around the highlight and pressing harder. But as I go into the red, I'm pressing lighter and lighter and lighter and making my circles a little bit bigger because again, I'm just trying to get it to blend pretty seamlessly. And what naturally happened was I kind of got that edge back, but never fear. I will just use the lighter color and color in circles again along that. And we're actually going to darken the core shadow pretty significantly in a minute. So if you're worried that the colors look too similar, never fear. We're going to address it. And I still have a bit of a line there, but because we're going to be darkening the core shadow, I'm not going to concern myself with that right now. So to darken the core shadow, we're going to use the opposite of red. It may seem a little counterintuitive. Why would I put green on my red object? But anytime you introduce an opposite color on the color wheel, they neutralize each other. The trick is knowing how hard to press, because if I just press really hard, it would appear green. And it may appear a little greenish in the beginning, but I'm going to put the green on, pressing lightly, because it's very dominant. It will show up beautifully without pressing hard. And then I'm going to go back over it with the red to not only blend it, but make the color redder and less green. So I'm just going to do the color in the core shadow, pressing medium pressure, just enough to kind of get it to show up well. But I'm also not making it quite as big as I did before. Before I did the red shadow, it was like that big. Now I'm doing the green smaller because I want the darkest part to be not incredibly dominant. And we're going to use the red to brighten the outside edges and blend them. So I'm pretty happy with that. I've just got kind of another crescent band, but thinner than the darker red earlier. Now I'm going to use the dark red again and very lightly go around the outside edge and color in circles, encouraging the green to blend into the local color. And at the same time, kind of nullifying the green and turning it into just a dark red. So I'm pretty happy with that edge. Now I'm going to do the left edge. Circle's not quite as big over here, and in fact, as I get up to the edge, I have to kind of color sideways because I don't want to go outside the circle. But then when I get more into the meat of it, I can do circles. But I don't have as much space here because the reflected light is much thinner than that part. So I'm just doing very small circles, but still pressing very lightly. And then after I'm done with that, if there's any presence or hint of a greenish hue left, I would go over that. But I think I've pretty much managed to get rid of it, and it just looks like dark red now. So now we're going to go develop the reflected light, or excuse me, the reflected light and the background a little bit more. So I'm going to go in and put in the cast shadow first. The cast shadow, if the light's coming from here, would sort of naturally be on the left side, and it'll start about halfway up the apple, loop around. It doesn't really matter how far out it goes, but the bottom edge, it's pretty important that it is flat or aligned with the bottom of the apple. It's going to just end right there, right where the apple touches the mat. And then I'm going to color it in pretty solid, but not pressing super hard, allowing some of those little white bits from the paper to show through for now. We're going to blend that out in a minute. And I'm going to use my light blue to blend it out. So anytime you're blending an oil pastel, it's usually a good idea to use the lighter of the two colors that you're trying to blend. So I'm using the lighter blue between the blues I've used, and I'm just going around the outside edge. First, and I'm blending it. As the shadow gets further away from the apple, it gets softer and more blended. So out here I'm coloring really lightly, but really big circles because I really want to stretch that dark blue shadow out till it sort of naturally disappears, just in a gradation or sort of an ombre effect. And then as I get closer, I'm coloring sideways, closer to the sphere, because I don't want to blend it too much. I just want to soften it. But then I'm going to color out into my mat a little bit more so that the color becomes more solid. Right up against the apple. Oh, excuse me, it's not an apple. It just looks like an apple. It's a sphere. I probably called it an apple more than once in this video because I keep thinking it looks like one. I'm also going to go into the cast shadow and press pretty hard with my light blue to blend the dark blue. I could have finished the outside too first. I just chose to go in here because it drew me for some reason. As I'm using the oil pastel, also I can peel off little bits of paper because that will get in the way. Just throw that in the garbage. You can see I got a little bit of red out here. It probably got stuck to the oil pastel. No big deal. In fact, it's a lovely effect to have the color of your sphere reflect on the color of the mat. And we're just going to add a little bit of that on purpose anyway, so no harm. Now I'm just coloring a little more solidly with the light blue from the cast shadow out so that it kind of disappears into the sketchy effect of the light blue I had earlier. Okay, pretty happy with that for right now. Let's go back and do the reflected light. At this point, I'm sort of doing it in no particular order. Like I could work more on the cast shadow or put in the highlight, but I'm just choosing the reflected light. I'm going to use the light blue and put it over the red. And this is one of my favorite parts because this is where the two colors start to marry. I'm using the light blue to blend the red on the reflected light, and it's creating the illusion that the blue is bouncing off of the red sphere all at the same time. So I'm being very careful around the edge to keep it sharp. Don't worry if it looks like those two colors are too similar because we are going to darken this blue shadow, which will make that sphere really pop forward. We just haven't done it yet. So I'm going all the way up the side on the sphere a little bit to get some of that reflected light even this high on the sphere. I won't go much higher than that because unless the ceiling was also blue, it wouldn't come down on the sphere that way. So let's go into the highlight next. What fun. So for this, it's pretty important to have a very clean white. So just spend a little extra time to color all edges of your white on your scratch paper. Make sure it's really clean. Start in the very center of the highlight and color in circles outward. And that way you don't have to clean your oil pastel as much. So once you start getting into the pinky color, then you can start coloring in little circles around the outside edge and you'll naturally turn your white oil pastel a little bit pink. But as we know, you can clean it. So definitely not a problem. Just kind of keep going around in light little circles until it seems very well blended. You can sort of dab at edges if it feels like it doesn't even need circles, it just needs a little encouragement. And there's our bright highlight. And now we're going to do something called the occlusion shadow, which is this very, very dark shadow only where the sphere touches the mat or the table. And it does creep up a bit on the left. It sort of turns into this darker shadow, but for the most part, it's the darkest part is really only where the sphere touches. A very common mistake I've seen is people tend to make the occlusion shadow smile or kind of creep up the sides of the sphere, but then it ceases to be an occlusion shadow and it starts to be a smile. So we want to just be careful to really only allow it to be super dark right where the sphere touches. So we can put a thick little line right there with the darkest blue we have. And then, as I mentioned, it's going to creep into the cast shadow. So sort of draw a two-pronged fork there, one coming up the side of the sphere and the other one following the edge of the cast shadow. And then just unite them so it becomes more of a triangle. And as you color out to the left, color lighter and lighter and lighter so it blends into the cast shadow pretty seamlessly. And if you need to blend more, you can always grab your blue, your darker, your lighter blue again and blend the outside edge a little bit. So here I'm just going to dab a little because I want that occlusion shadow to end up in a nice little point. Get rid of the crumbs. There's a crumb right there. I'm just going to use my fingernail to pull it off. And I will use my lighter blue, I guess this is really my medium blue, to blend the occlusion shadow into the cast shadow a bit more. I'm coloring very lightly now because I have a very thick layer of oil pastel. So if I were to press hard, I would just sort of create ridges and dents in it and probably pull some of the color off without really intending to. Oops, I've got a big dark blue smudge there. So this is where I am pressing hard because I want that dark blue smudge to go away. I had said earlier I was going to do blue-green to kind of add a little variety. So I'm just going to add a very, very light coat of this light green to most of the blue. I'm not going to go crazy with it because I want it to seem a little more organic, sort of stream of consciousness color adding. And in the cast shadow, I'm coloring very lightly because, again, I don't want to create ridges or dents in it. So just kind of creating a presence of the light green without allowing it to dominate at all. And I'm not even going all the way out to the edges of my sketchiness of light blue. And then I'm also going to just wipe it off and put a little bit on the reflected light so that it matches, the reflected light matches the matte. And you can see what a nice glow that creates there. And then you can just kind of monkey with it as much as you want. Oh, I had also said, and we should do this, I'm going to put a little bit of red into the cast shadow on purpose just to help the sphere marry with the cast shadow even more. So the red reflects onto the blue-green reflects onto the red, and it looks very cohesive and natural. And then I'm going to use the light blue. I guess I could have used the green if I wanted it a little greener. It doesn't really matter. But I'm going to use the light blue since it is dominantly blue and just blend in large circles to get that red to soften into the cast shadow. So again, you can just kind of mess with it as much as you want to make it look the way you'd like. But now we've had a good study in the anatomy of light and shadow as used in oil pastel. So I'm just going to walk through the different types of light and shadow again with you one more time. So we have the highlight, local color, core shadow, reflected light, cast shadow, occlusion shadow. And that's it. Thank you so much for joining me today.